Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Jeffrey Epstein Show. I'm your host, Bobbycapucci, and this is Daily Drop number 247. The other day when we were talking about Deutsche Bank getting slapped with that $150 million fine for their ties to Jeffrey Epstein, they were pretty vague with the statement of just Deutsche Bank in general. Well, today, the New York Times has a report out, and they're naming names. The New York Times has named the executives responsible for Jeffrey Epstein and his transactions while at Deutsche Bank. Now, we know that these people who were facilitating these deals, we know that they knew what was up. We have Ellen Powell, the former CEO of Reddit, the other day coming out and saying, "Oh, we all knew that Ghislaine Maxwell was involved with sex trafficking." And that's just a microcosm for all of them, because they all knew the deal. They all knew that Jeffrey Epstein was a sick son of a bitch. They knew that he was involved in some sordid stuff. He was already a convicted sex offender when they took his business. And they actually thought that they would be able to cover their tracks. Well, they're wrong. And now, those who facilitated these transactions with Deutsche Bank, they've been put on blast by the New York Times. Our article tonight is from Fox Business, and the headline is, Deutsche Bank executives responsible for Epstein relationship named by the New York Times. And we're reading this article because the New York Times article is behind the paywall, and I want everybody to be able to check out the source for themselves, like usual. So, this article was authored by Paul Best. The New York Times on Monday named multiple Deutsche Bank executives who were responsible for the bank's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, the convicted sex offender, pedophile, and financier who was found dead by apparent suicide last August. Well, that's nice. At least the author used apparent, because let's be real, it was an apparent suicide. So, the New York Times, who I'm usually very critical of, is actually doing some good work here, right? It's important that people understand who was behind this and where they're at now. Because they have to be responsible and held responsible for their role in facilitating Jeffrey Epstein's financial crimes. Everybody who was involved with this man and his ill-gotten gains must be subpoenaed, must be brought before a seasoned investigator, and they must answer questions. This comes 1 week after New York State's Department of Financial Services fined Deutsche Bank $150 million for significant compliance failures in connection with the bank's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. And the $150 million is a drop in the bucket to Deutsche Bank, right? The $150 million is not the big deal here. The fact of the matter is, it's important, really, because it puts the spotlight on the fact that there was some really funky transactions going through Deutsche Bank, and it all ties into the whole overarching money laundering scheme these disgusting animals were running on top of their sex trafficking scheme. And meanwhile, all of these people in polite society who enabled them, who acted as conduits for them to be invited into polite society, continue to try and distance themselves from these people. Oh, that's not me in the picture. Oh, couldn't be me. And then you have the same thing for these bankers, right? All of these people that were involved with Jeffrey Epstein from Jess Staley on down are quick to point out how, it was just a professional relationship. Well, what were you doing on his island, Jess Staley, if it was just a professional relationship? And I am sure if we dig into these names of these individuals as well, we will find similar behavior outside of a working environment. All of these people rubbed elbows at all of these functions. Look, it's a very small club. To breathe the air that these people breathe, the so-called rarefied air of so-called polite society, you have to have big money. and you have to be one of these movers and shakers. And there's not many people like that, right? So all of these people are not just associating in the business world. When it comes to people like Jeffrey Epstein and these hedge fund managers and these private wealth bankers, these people, it was a two-way street. Not only were they facilitating Jeffrey Epstein's transactions and money, right? Because they were definitely doing that. But Jeffrey Epstein, in turn, was bringing business to them and moving business towards them, right? Pushing other people to do business with these banks, people in his atmosphere. So it was one big, gigantic, circular screw job. So, of course, the $150 million is just a drop in the bucket. But it's the other things that it opens up, the other questions that now must be asked, and the spotlight that it once again shines on the financial aspects of this sex trafficking ring. Look, if R. Kelly, I talked about this earlier, if R. Kelly is being charged with RICO, then there is no way on this planet that Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell and the Core Four and Jean-Luc Brunel should not also be charged with RICO. And from those RICO charges, who knows where it ends up? Les Wexner, Glenn Dubin, you name it, it could end up anywhere. Because when you follow the money, well, you usually end up in a politician's office. Deutsche Bank maintained a relationship with Epstein from August 2013 until December 2018, despite the fact that he was convicted of soliciting prostitution from a minor in 2008, according to a consent order filed by New York financial regulators. That alone is just enough to make you ill. We're talking about New York here, okay? There are no shortage of extremely wealthy people. You mean to tell me that Deutsche Bank needed Jeffrey Epstein's money so bad, that they were hurting for investment money so bad, that they would take the money of a convicted sex offender, a man convicted of soliciting underage prostitution, but whose crimes were much worse, and everybody knew it. They really needed to take the business of this man? No. I'm not buying that. This was done to help facilitate him because of his professional relationships with the financial sector. The Times reports that Paul Morris, who previously helped manage Epstein's account at JP Morgan, hello Jess Staley, I'm looking at you, sir, was the banker that originally introduced Epstein to bank executives in 2013 as a client who could generate $2 to $4 million of revenue annually. He was referred to as relationship manager number 1 by financial regulators in the consent order. And they try to be hush-hush about this, right? They try and make it so nobody knows who the people were that were responsible for facilitating this man's financial crimes. As if the public doesn't have a right to know. I mean, how many people have their money at Deutsche Bank, at JP Morgan? Why would anyone want to have their money at an institution such as this when these executives can't even help themselves from trying to enrich themselves on the back of a sex trafficker and money launderer? And we're not acting like this man was running around hush hush like he's some sort of in the dark mafioso don. This guy was very brazen about who he was, what he was doing, what he was about. And it is insane to me to think that these banksters have gotten away with this for so long. They have gotten away with their relationships with people like Jeffrey Epstein for so long, facilitating just hundreds of billions of dollars of laundered money. And that's not just Deutsche Bank or Jeffrey Epstein. I'm talking about overall how the banking system is set up. But you better pay your overdraft fees, sir. Oh, no, you can't have that $5,000 loan, sir. I'm sorry. You can't go get your teeth fixed. But if you're Jeffrey Epstein and you're friends with these scumbags in the banking industry and the banking world, well, they'll facilitate your money laundering. They'll wash that shit for you nice and good and give it back to you all tucked away and pressed. It was Charles Packard the head of the bank's American Wealth Management Division, who approved of the bank's relationship with Epstein in 2013, according to the Times. Both Morris and Packard are no longer employed at Deutsche Bank. Oh, well, isn't that convenient? Both of them are still employed in the financial district, however. You see, for people like this, there should be like some sort of lifetime ban. Like if you gamble on your team in sports, how you get a lifetime ban, that's what these dudes should get. A lifetime ban. They can't be bankers anymore. They can't work in the financial sector. They can't work on Wall Street. They should have to get real jobs, make 15, 20 bucks an hour, and that should be the end of it for these people. They've been proven they can't be trusted. Who would trust these people with their money? Anybody out there? Is anybody that's listening to this podcast, would you give these clowns your money and let them try and manage it for you? I certainly wouldn't. After the relationship with Epstein began, Deutsche Bank ignored dozens of red flags the regulators say should have prompted additional security. So, we've established the fact that he was finessing the shit out of the financial system. He had his own banks, he had all sorts of LLCs, all kinds of shell companies, and there were a ton of red flags. And there should have been suspicious activity reports in the FinCEN database for just about every transaction this clownfish made. But yet there wasn't. Cover was given. Protection was had. According to a press release by the New York Department of Financial Services, these red flags included payments to individuals who were publicly alleged to have been Mr. Epstein's co-conspirators in sexually abusing young women. Okay, stop. Okay? How is this not RICO? He's paying off co-conspirators in a criminal enterprise. People who took part in the criminal enterprise. How is this any different from what El Chapo did, or what John Gotti did, or what Gas Pipe Casso did, or what Vinnie Gorgeous did, or any of them? The difference is, those people, well, they weren't part of polite society. Those people were actually, hard-working gangsters that worked for a living. These people in the government, these are the pro-looters. These are the real La Cosa Nostra. This is the real organized criminals we're dealing with, the people in the government, the CIA, etc., etc. And that's how Jeffrey Epstein has avoided RICO, my friends, because he was protected for so long, and the ties run so deep with so many on high, that if they slap them with the RICO counts, then it's a wrap for everybody. So naturally, I'm going to be standing here calling for those RICO counts, because enough is enough. It is time to kneecap this whole entire operation from top to bottom. Cut them root and stem. Settlement payments totaling over $7 million, as well as dozens of payments to law firms totaling over $6 million for what appear to have been the legal expenses of Mr. Epstein and his co-conspirators. Again, how is this not RICO? Oh my God, this is such a RICO case, it's not even funny. In the R. Kelly case, originally RICO wasn't charged, and then they hit him with that superseded indictment, and that's where they alleged RICO. So I'm hoping we get to see that after another one or two of these co-conspirators are swooped up. I'm willing to have some patience here, but I have to point out that this is obviously a RICO case, and it gets more clear by the day. Before we had, some circumstantial evidence, some very strong circumstantial evidence, right, that this was a RICO case, just on what we knew alone. You could put together a very, very, very strong case for RICO and have a judge sign off on it, I'm guessing, right? Okay, so now, with everything else we're finding out, with the financial crimes added on top of it, well, how can it not be RICO? And, of course, also the Mann Act, because of the interstate movement of these girls involved in this sex trafficking ring. So there's a whole bunch of different laws that have not even been applied yet. And as we move forward, if there's any justice in this world, which we know there probably isn't, but we have to hold these people accountable, right? We have to make sure that we call for the prosecution to do the right thing still. And if there's any justice in the world, and there's anybody in this prosecutor's office that truly cares, we will see this case completely flower, and we will see the roots of RICO take hold. Payments to Russian models, payments for women's school tuition, hotel and rent expenses, and consistent with public allegations of prior wrongdoing, payments directly to numerous women with Eastern European surnames, and periodic suspicious cash withdrawals, in total more than $800,000 over approximately 4 years. All right, so I'm guessing that those cash withdrawals were probably in excess of the $10,000 mark. So there have to be CTRs with those transactions. Anytime that over $10,000 is coming over the counter, either way to be distributed or deposited, that has to be CTR'd and has to be filed in the system. So I'm curious to see how many of these CTRs are in there. Boy, wouldn't that be nice, huh? To have access to the FinCEN database and to see what sort of red flags these banks raised in regards to Epstein and his accounts. Because the whole entire account should just be littered with red flags for pretty much every transaction. The New York Times details how Morris and Packard visited Epstein at his Manhattan mansion in January 2015 to ask him about these red flags, as well as about the veracity of the recent allegations in the media. They left satisfied with Epstein's explanation. Of course they did. Of course they did. Because Epstein was making them money. I'm sure that they were making a percentage on everything Epstein was turning for the institution, right? I'm sure they were making a commission. They don't do this job just because, they like numbers. So I'm sure they were making some sort of commission off of Epstein, and their greed and their self-enrichment took precedent over the fact that Jeffrey Epstein was a convicted sex offender, a pedophile, and an all-around scumbag. I honestly have no idea how anyone could do any kind of business with Deutsche Bank, or JP Morgan, or Barclays. Deutsche Bank ended its relationship with Epstein in November 2018 after the Miami Herald exposed the extent of Epstein's sexual misconduct, as well as the sweetheart deal he got from the prosecutors. So basically, Deutsche Bank it wasn't about the fact that Epstein was a criminal, right? It wasn't about the fact that Epstein was a convicted sex offender. It wasn't about the fact that Jeffrey Epstein was involved in a sex trafficking ring. None of that mattered. What mattered was that it was exposed and that Deutsche Bank would end up having to answer questions about that relationship. And we see it now. If the article does not come out in 2018 and the subsequent arrest of Jeffrey Epstein, etc., Deutsche Bank would have still been facilitating this man's crimes. They would have still been doing business with this man. So for them to come out and act like they would not be doing business with him, like they're so shocked that this occurred, or that they're, we're going to take steps to make sure it doesn't happen in the future. Meanwhile, they probably have 1,000 accounts right now from scumbags around the world that are engaged in the same thing as Jeffrey Epstein and other crimes. It's all a joke. The banking sector is an absolute dumpster fire full of greed, scumbaggery, and money laundering at the highest levels, folks. The highest levels. They want to call mafia people organized crime. They want to call El Chapo a criminal. Well, I'll tell you what, the OG looters are in Washington, D.C. No doubt about that. The OG thieves are in Washington, D.C. In fact, since the Redskins are changing their name, they might as well just call themselves the Washington Thieves to fit with the rest of the scuzzbags that inhabit that city. If you'd like to contact me, you can do that at bobbycapucci@protonmail.com. That's BOBBYCAPUCCI@protonmail.com. You can also find me on Twitter at BOBBY_CAPUCCI. All right, everybody. You'll find all of the links that pertain to the episode within the description box. We will be back tomorrow and we will do it all over again.